On a dimly lit train, James shifted his weight, clutching the rail as he glanced at the woman across from him. She was pregnant, her hand trembling as she clutched a pole for balance. Her face, pale and drawn, told him she was struggling. Without hesitation, James stood and offered his seat. "Please," he said, his voice soft but firm. She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the seat, before she finally sank down with a weak smile. "Thank you," she murmured. James nodded, moving toward the door. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was to get home for his younger sister's birthday dinner. He checked his watch. If the train stayed on schedule, he'd just make it. For a fleeting moment, he felt a quiet pride in his small gesture of kindness. But the peace shattered when the train jerked at the next stop, and the woman's head lolled forward. Her bag hit the floor, and she collapsed, gasping for air. The car fell silent, tension thickening the air. A man shouted, "Help her!" James rushed forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, crouching beside her as chaos erupted. Someone pulled the emergency brake. People shouted over one another, their words sharp and panicked. And then, through shallow breaths, the woman pointed a trembling finger at James. "It was him," she whispered, her voice like broken glass. "He did something to me." The accusation stunned James. His stomach tightened, and his ears buzzed with disbelief. "What?" he stammered. "I didn't do anything." Her words spread through the car like wildfire. Suspicious glances turned into pointed stares. Murmurs swelled into a tide of distrust. "He was standing right next to her," someone muttered. "Maybe he slipped something into her drink," another suggested. James's heart raced. "No, I gave her my seat, that's all." But the words felt hollow, powerless against the storm of judgment brewing around him. At the next station, officers boarded the train. Their presence silenced the crowd, but did nothing to ease the tension. "Step off the train," one officer said, his tone commanding but measured. James froze, his mind spinning. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "Ask anyone here. I was just trying to help." "We'll sort this out," the officer replied. But James could see it in their eyes, the seed of doubt already planted. Passengers spilled onto the platform, their fragmented accounts painting James as a shadowy figure of suspicion. "He was close to her," one woman said, nodding toward James. "Too close." A teenage girl in the back raised her hand timidly. "I saw him," she said, her voice trembling. "He didn't do anything. He just gave her his seat." Her words were a faint light in the suffocating darkness, but they barely registered in the sea of whispers. As the officers questioned James, the pregnant woman, now stabilized, clung to her story. "He was right there," she insisted. "I don't know what he did, but I felt dizzy." "Weak." James clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "Check the cameras," he said through gritted teeth. "The truth is there." The minutes dragged on like hours, but eventually an officer returned. His expression had shifted. "The footage clears you," he admitted. "You didn't do anything." James exhaled, the relief bitter in his throat. He wanted to scream, to demand apologies from the people who had looked at him like he was less than human, but instead, he said nothing. As the train pulled away, the teenage girl approached him again, her phone in hand. "I recorded everything," she said. "The truth. I posted it online." James looked at her, his voice hoarse. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. People need to see how wrong it is to jump to conclusions. Later, at his sister's birthday dinner, James sat quietly as the room buzzed with laughter and joy. But his thoughts lingered on the train, on the whispers, on how quickly kindness had turned into suspicion. His sister noticed the shadow in his eyes. "Rough day?" she asked softly. James nodded. "Yeah." He told her the story, each word heavy with the weight of what he'd endured. Her eyes filled with anger and sadness. "You didn't deserve that," she said. "You did the right thing, and they turned it into something ugly." James stared at his hands. "Kindness shouldn't feel like a risk," he said quietly. His sister rested a hand on his shoulder. "It's not about them, James. It's about you. You stayed true to who you are, even when it hurt. That's what matters." As he looked out at the city lights that night, James felt the sting of the day lingering in his chest. But beneath it, there was a quiet resolve. The world might be quick to judge, quick to turn on those who stand out, but kindness, even when met with suspicion, was worth it, because someone had to break the cycle. And if faced with the same choice again, James knew he'd do it all over.